it was over. The conversation ended, maybe with resolution, maybe without it, maybe just with the natural running out of words. And we went our separate ways, back to our respective lives, back to the present moment that was waiting for both of us. Well, except I didn't go back. Not entirely. See, part of me stayed there in that exchange, in the particular way something was said or not said. In the moment, I felt misunderstood or dismissed or unseen. And while the rest of my life continued all around me, while I made coffee or drove somewhere or tried to sleep, a portion of my attention remained in a room I'd already left with a person who had almost certainly moved on. I was replaying it. Not once, not as a brief review, but on a loop with variations. So the version where I said the sharper thing, the version where I stayed calm, the version where they finally understood what I meant, the version where I held my ground without losing my warmth, or lost my warmth so completely and satisfyingly that it actually felt worth it, almost. This was the director's cut of a conversation that already happened and cannot be changed. Here's what makes this particular dream so convincing. It doesn't feel like suffering. It feels like work. See, the ego self has a very persuasive story about why this repetition is necessary. I'm processing, it says. I'm preparing for the next conversation. I'm making sure I understand what happened. I'm working it out. And so I let it continue because it seems responsible, because walking away from it feels like avoidance. Because somewhere underneath the logic is the feeling that if I just replay it enough times, something will resolve. It won't. What's actually happening is something much simpler and much less flattering. The ego self doesn't like to lose, doesn't like to feel unseen, doesn't like to leave an encounter without having been fully understood and fully right. And since the actual conversation didn't deliver that, since actual conversations rarely do, the ego self retreated into a private theater where it could run the scene again with better results. I wasn't processing. I was auditioning better versions of myself for an audience that just wasn't there. But here's what I've come to understand about what I was really mourning. It wasn't the conversation that went wrong. It was the real conversation that never happened. Because a real conversation, not merely an actual one, is something different entirely. A real conversation is a meeting. Two people genuinely present, both actually here, actually listening, actually open to being changed by the encounter. Two consciousnesses making contact across the ordinary distance between human beings. What we'd had was an actual conversation, an exchange of words, a transaction. Two people taking turns, being absent in each other's company, while the present moment waited patiently outside the door. And the ego self, and all its replaying, was trying to manufacture retroactively the realness that was missing. They're trying to think its way into a genuine meeting that had already ended without ever quite beginning. Which is why it could never succeed. You can't not replay your way into presence. Presence is here now, not something that you replay in the past, from the past. There's a story about two monks walking together. They come to a muddy crossing and find a woman unable to pass without ruining her clothing, right? So one monk, without hesitation, picks her up, carries her across, sets her down gently on the other side. and the two monks continue walking. 5 miles later, the second monk, who's been silent and increasingly agitated, finally speaks up. "You picked up that woman. You know that is against our beliefs." And so the first monk looks at him quietly, and he says, "I carried her across a puddle and set her down 5 miles ago. You seem to still be carrying her." That's the stone in the backpack. That's what the replaying is. Not a wound requiring tending. No, not unfinished business demanding more mental attention. Just a stone I picked up somewhere along the path and forgot to put down. And because it had been there a while, it started to feel like it belonged there. Like carrying it was part of the journey rather than a weight added to it. The familiar is so easily mistaken for the necessary. The return from this particular dream has a very specific texture. It arrives with exhaustion. Somewhere in the middle of the 14th variation, I noticed I'm tired. Not physically, I'm tired of the loop, tired of the theater, tired of the energy this is costing for zero return. And in that tiredness, something loosens. Oh, I'm still there. I've still been there for hours. And now the observer self, the one that always is watching, always present beneath the ego self's performance, quietly steps forward, not to judge the replaying, not to add another layer of commentary. Why do I do this? I should be better at this by now. No, that would just be the ego self picking up a different stone. The self simply notices, and in the noticing, puts it down. Not to resolve the conversation, not to reach a conclusion about the person or what it all means, just to recognize that I've been carrying something and to set it here, on this particular patch of path, in this particular moment. The conversation happened. It was what it was. If something genuinely remains unfinished, something that could become a real conversation rather than merely another actual one, then that's worth returning to, in presence, with the other person actually there, with both of us actually here. But the replay, that ends now. The present moment, unchanged by my absence, still here, still open, holding nothing against me for the miles I walked while somewhere else in my mind. I've been carrying her long enough. Time to put her down. Yeah, I'm the second monk. Today, at some point, a conversation will live in me longer than it lives in the other person. I'll know it when the replay begins. In the same scene from a slightly different angle, the better version of what I said. When I catch it, and I will catch it, because the self is developing that muscle now, the observer self, I'll pause and ask one question. Am I still carrying her? That's enough. And the question itself is the return. The self already knows the answer. And the observer self already knows what to do. Put the stone down. The path is lighter than the ego self has been making it. If something in this episode found you somewhere you recognize, you're already awake enough to know it. And that recognition, that quiet sense of, yes, I know that place, is your observer self identifying itself, confirming that it was here the entire time. watching, waiting, ready to step forward the moment you gave it your attention. And that's not nothing. That's everything. If you want to go further, if the territory we've been exploring feels like somewhere worth spending more time, the frequency arc is where this work lives. It's a gathering place, built for those ready to raise their frequency and remember their connection to something larger than the ego self's daily drama. It's not a system, it's not a doctrine. It's just a space where authentic frequency does the work that argument and explanation cannot. You'll find it at the frequency arc, and I'll leave the details in the notes for this episode. And just so you know, there are more episodes in this series, each one a different drift, each one the same 3 movements, each one an ordinary moment revealing something extraordinary about the consciousness experiencing it. Come back for the next one, or find another episode that calls to you, or another podcast that calls to you. The present moment will be there when you arrive. It always is.